Mr. President, let me touch on one particular aspect of the Korea Free Trade Agreement that I find especially troubling, and I think the American people, to the degree they understand this and learn about it, will also find troubling. And that is that this particular free trade agreement will force American workers to compete not just against the low-wage workers in China or Vietnam or Mexico. They're going to be forced to compete against the virtual slave labor that exists in North Korea, the most undemocratic country in the world, and a country itself whose government will financially benefit from this agreement with the dictatorship of Kim Jong Il. Mr. President, we all know that under current law, the U.S. has an embargo on all North Korea goods for a very good reason. Workers in North Korea, the most brutalized in the world, have virtually no democratic rights and are at the mercy of the most vicious dictator in the world. But if the South Korea Free Trade Agreement is signed into law, the United States would have a new obligation to allow South Korean products to come into our country tariff-free that contain major parts made by North Korean workers who make pennies an hour. According to a January 2011 report from the Congressional Research Service, and I quote, "There is nothing to prevent South Korean firms from performing intermediate manufacturing operations in North Korea and then performing final manufacturing processes in South Korea." In other words, there's a huge industrial park in North Korea. South Korean companies own that park. Workers there are paid horrendously low wages, and some of those wages go right to the North Korean government. Products made in that industrial park in North Korea will go to South Korea and then will come back into the United States as part of that so-called free trade agreement. Today, over 47,000 North Korean workers are currently employed by more than 120 South Korean firms, including Hyundai, at the Kaesing Industrial Complex in North Korea. This facility is located just 6 miles north of the demilitarized zone, with direct road and rail access to South Korea and just an hour's drive away from Seoul. These North Korean workers officially make a minimum wage of 35 cents an hour, but they actually make much less than that. Instead of paying these workers directly, Hyundai and the other South Korean firms pay the North Korean government. How's that? South Korean companies, major companies, pay the North Korean government. They take a piece of the action, going to the most undemocratic, vicious dictatorship in the world. Products then go to South Korea, and then they're part of the free trade agreement with South Korea. In 2007, Han Duck-soo, who was then the prime minister of South Korea and is now the current South Korean ambassador to the United States, said, and I quote, "The planned ratification of the South Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement will pave the way for the export of products built in Kaesong, North Korea, into the U.S. market," end of quote. So, what we have now is American workers forced to compete against desperate people all over the world who are making a tiny fraction of the wages that are paid in America, forced to compete against countries where there are no environmental standards, where workers' unions are not recognized or respected. But now it gets even worse. American workers are now being forced to compete against the virtual slave labor in North Korea as part of this trade agreement.